The air inside the auction hall was thick with the smell of hay and whiskey, a mix of earthy grit and polished wealth. Men in tailored suits and silver belt buckles lounged in leather chairs, flipping through catalogs of horses worth more than most people's homes. Their laughter was sharp, their glasses clinking like coins. Then the doors creaked open. Silas Beckett walked in, his boots dusty, his flannel shirt frayed at the cuffs. Salt and pepper stubble shadowed his jaw, and his hands, rough from decades of ranch work, hung loosely at his sides. The room went quiet. Eyes narrowed. A young rancher in a crisp blazer snorted to his friend, who let that relic in here. He looks like he can't afford a feed bag. Silas ignored them. His gaze stayed fixed on the black stallion pacing in the paddock, Storm King, a beast with a bloodline of champions. The horse's eyes locked onto his, wild and wary, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. A security guard stepped into Silas's path, blocking him. "This ain't a rodeo, sir. Serious buyers only." Silas didn't flinch. A faint smile tugged at his lips as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Preston Holloway, a breeder with a reputation as cold as his whiskey, leaned back in his front row seat. "Maybe he's here for the free drinks," he drawled, smirking. The room erupted in laughter. Silas waited. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate. When the auctioneer finally called Storm King to the block, bids exploded. 50,000, 50,000, 75,000, climbing faster than a wildfire. Preston smirked, watching Silas stand motionless. "Just a washed-up cowboy," he muttered. Then Silas lifted his hand. 500. The room froze. The auctioneer blinked. 500,000. Silas nodded once. The gavel slammed. Sold. The silence was deafening. Preston's face turned ashen. The guard who tried to eject Silas earlier stared, slack-jawed. Without a word, Silas pulled a cashier's check from his pocket, creased but valid, and handed it over. The auctioneer's voice trembled. "Storm King belongs to Mr. Beckett." Preston shot to his feet. "This is a joke," he barked. But the crowd no longer laughed with him. They stared at Silas, the man they'd mocked, now holding the reins of a horse worth $500,000. Storm King nudged Silas's palm, calm for the first time all night. "Never judge a man," Silas said quietly, tipping his hat. Then he led the stallion out, the doors swinging shut behind him. Inside, the air hummed with shame. Outside, the night swallowed them whole. The old rancher and the king of horses, both finally free. The sun hung low over Silas's ranch, painting the fields in gold. Storm King galloped across the open land, his black coat gleaming like polished obsidian. Dust swirled around his hooves as he raced the wind, muscles rippling under sweat-slicked fur. Silas leaned against the fence, a cup of bitter coffee in hand, watching. The stallion wasn't just a horse. He was a ghost from the past, a mirror of the animals Silas had trained before betrayal stripped him of everything. Caleb approached, wiping grease from his hands. "Folks in town are talking," he said, squinting at the horizon. "Say Preston's been asking questions. Real loud ones." Silas grunted. Preston's pride had been gutted in front of the only crowd that mattered to him. Men like that didn't let go. Inside the barn, Storm King stood quietly, as Silas brushed his coat, the rhythm steady, familiar. The horse's breath warmed Silas's neck, a silent trust earned without words. Years ago, another stallion, a chestnut named Ember, had stood in this same spot. Silas had trained him, loved him, until a forged contract and a handshake with a liar handed Ember to a man in a suit. Preston's father, the memory bit deeper than any spur. That night, rain lashed the ranch. Silas sat at his desk, a single lamp casting shadows on faded photos of younger days, rodeos, trophies, Ember's wild eyes staring back. A knock rattled the door. A rancher from the next county stood soaked on the porch, hat in hand. "Preston's offering cash for dirt on you," he said, voice low. "Says he'll ruin whoever sides with you." Silas thanked him with a nod and a bottle of whiskey. Loyalty out here wasn't bought, it was earned. By dawn, Storm King was gone. Silas found the stallion at the far edge of the property, grazing calmly beside a broken fence post. The cut wires were clean, deliberate. Someone had tried to spook him, to send him bolting into the hills. But Storm King hadn't run. He'd waited. Silas ran a hand along the stallion's neck, fingers brushing a fresh scar, thin, precise, a blade's work. Preston's signature. The town diner buzzed when Silas walked in. Conversations died. Eyes dropped to plates. At the counter, the waitress slid him coffee without asking. "He's been here," she muttered. nodding to a booth where Preston's hat still dented the leather. Told everyone you're a cheat, a thief. Silas sipped his coffee. Let them talk. Truth didn't bend for lies. Back at the ranch, Caleb met him with a crowbar and a grim smile. Found a tracker under your truck, he said, tossing the device into the dirt. Fancy one. City made. Silas crushed it under his boot. Preston wasn't just angry. He was scared. A man who bought loyalty didn't know what to do when it couldn't be sold. That evening, Storm King refused his feed. His eyes were fever bright, nostrils flaring. Silas pressed a palm to the horse's side. A rapid heartbeat, too fast. Poison. The word hissed through his mind like a snake. He worked through the night, mixing remedies from old jars in the barn, forcing bitter drafts down the stallion's throat. By sunrise, Storm King's breathing steadied. Silas slumped against the stall, exhaustion heavy as guilt. They'd targeted the horse to break him, to prove he couldn't protect what he loved. A note arrived at noon, slipped under his door. You don't belong here. Never did. Preston's handwriting, slashed onto paper like a threat. Silas fed it to the stove, watching the flames curl black edges into ash. Let Preston come. Let him try. As dusk fell, a rumble echoed in the distance. Not thunder. Trucks. Headlights speared the twilight, engines growling like beasts. Silas stood on the porch, shotgun loose in his grip. Storm King paced behind the barn, restless but unharmed. Caleb emerged from the shadows, a rifle slung over his shoulder. How many? He asked. Silas counted the lights. Enough. The trucks rolled to a stop, engines idling like growling dogs. Headlights pinned Silas and Caleb in stark light, their shadows stretching long and thin across the dirt. Preston stepped out first, his boots crunching gravel, flanked by 6 men in denim and leather. Their faces were hard, their hands hovering near belt buckles and holsters. Storm King snorted from the barn, sensing the tension. Preston stopped 10 feet from the porch. You've got something that don't belong to you, Beckett. His voice was smooth, but his eyes flickered to the barn. Hand over the horse, and we'll call it even. Silas didn't move. The shotgun hung loose in his grip, finger resting easy on the trigger guard. Horse ain't yours to claim. A smirk twisted Preston's lips. He nodded at his men. 2 broke off, circling toward the barn. Storm King's hoof struck wood inside, a warning thunder. Silas raised his voice. You touch that stallion, you'll regret it. Preston laughed. Or what? You'll shoot us? You ain't got the spine. Caleb shifted, rifle rising, but Silas held up a hand. Wait. The men reached the barn doors. One yanked them open and froze. Storm King stood just inside, head high, eyes blazing. The man reached for a rope. The stallion lunged, teeth bared, snapping the air inches from his face. The man stumbled back, cursing. Preston's smirk faded. Silas stepped off the porch, shotgun still low. That horse has more fight in him than your whole crew. He kept walking, closing the gap between himself and Preston. You think money makes you strong? You think fear makes you a king? He stopped, close enough to see the sweat on Preston's temple. Out here, it's the land that judges. And you? He glanced at the men, now hesitating. You're just dust. Preston's hand twitched toward his belt, a flicker of steel. Silas moved faster, swinging the shotgun butt into Preston's wrist. The knife clattered to the ground. Preston hissed, clutching his arm. You're dead, he spat. An engine roared in the distance. Headlights surged over the hill. Trucks, older and rusted, but dozens of them. Ranchers from neighboring counties, their rigs spewing dirt as they skidded to a halt. Men and women climbed out, shotguns and wrangling ropes in hand. The same rancher who'd warned Silas about Preston's threats stepped forward. We heard there was a party, he said, spitting tobacco. Ain't right to leave folks out. Preston's men glanced at each other, edging back. The odds had shifted. Storm King reared in the barn, his scream splitting the night. Preston lunged for the knife, but Silas kicked it aside, grabbing him by the collar. You poisoned him, cut my fences, sent your rats to scare me. His voice was ice. But you ain't scared me, you scared them. He jerked his chin at Preston's men, now retreating to their trucks. Preston struggled, face red. You're nothing, a nobody. Silas leaned closer. And you're a ghost. He released him with a shove. Get off my land, and take your lies with you. The ranchers parted as Preston stumbled to his truck, his men peeling out behind him. Dust choked the air, then settled. Storm King quieted, watching from the barn. Caleb lowered his rifle. That's it? Silas stared at the horizon, where Preston's taillights vanished. For now, The crowd lingered, swapping stories and whiskey. Silas moved through them, nods replacing words. At the barn, Storm King nuzzled his shoulder, breath warm. The stallion's scar was healing. Later, alone on the porch, Silas studied the stars. The fight wasn't over. Men like Preston didn't quit, but tonight had proven something. Respect wasn't bought, it was earned. And Silas Beckett had just claimed his. The weeks that followed were quiet, but the air hummed with unease. Storm King roamed the ranch freely now, his presence a silent guardian. Silas repaired the fences, the cuts in the wire smoothed over but not forgotten. Caleb kept watch, rifle propped against the barn door, while ranchers from neighboring lands drifted in and out, their trucks kicking up dust on the long dirt road. They didn't stay long, just long enough to share coffee, swap warnings, or leave a jug of homemade whiskey on the porch. Loyalty, out here, was a currency thicker than blood. Preston's name still lingered like a bad smell. Rumors spread, his breeding deals collapsing, investors backing out, lawsuits piling up like dead leaves. Men who'd once feared him now whispered behind his back. Pride had hollowed him out, and desperation made him reckless. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a storm gathered on the plains. Thunder rolled in the distance, lightning stitching the sky. Silas stood in the barn, brushing Storm King's coat, the stallion's ears twitching at the first drops of rain. Caleb burst in, face pale. "Preston's at the county auction," he said, breathless. "Brought a trailer, says he's taken back what's his." Silas's hands stilled. Storm King nudged him, restless. The auction house. Of course, Preston's last stand, a public spectacle to salvage his pride. The drive to town was silent, the old truck rattling against the wind. Storm King stood steady in the trailer, his eyes sharp, as if he knew what awaited. The auction hall glowed like a beacon in the storm, trucks and SUVs crowding the lot. Inside, the crowd was thinner now, the wealthy elites replaced by wary locals. Preston stood at the front, his suit rumpled, his voice too loud as he argued with the auctioneer. Silas walked in, rain dripping from his hat. Conversations died. Preston turned, his face twisting. "You," he hissed. "This ends tonight." The auctioneer hesitated, glancing between them. "Mr. Holloway has contested the sale of Storm King," he said carefully. "Claims the bid was fraudulent." Preston slammed a fist on the podium. "That horse is mine. His bloodline, his papers, all tied to my ranch. Beckett's a thief." Silas didn't speak. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed envelope, its edges frayed. Inside were photographs, a younger Silas beside a chestnut stallion, Ember, their faces pressed close. Newspaper clippings followed. Local rancher wins national championship. Tragic sale of prize stallion amid fraud allegations. And finally, a deed signed decades ago, transferring ownership of Ember to Preston's father. The ink was faded, but the forgery was clear, a shaky signature that didn't match Silas's sharp scrawl. "Ember was mine," Silas said, his voice cutting through the room. "Your father stole him, just like you tried to steal Storm King." Preston's face drained of color. The crowd leaned in, murmurs rising. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses, studying the documents. "These allegations, if proven true." "Lies!" Preston shouted. But his voice cracked. Storm King's whinny echoed outside, sharp and commanding. Silas stepped closer to Preston. "You're so scared of being nothing. You became worse than nothing." He turned to the crowd. "Storm King stays with me, and this," he held up the forged deed, "ends now." A rancher at the back stood. "I remember Ember. Saw Silas ride him at the fair. Damn shame what happened." Others nodded, voices rising in agreement. Preston staggered back, clutching the podium. His empire of lies was crumbling, and the crowd, once his audience, now turned their backs. Silas walked out, the storm raging in full. Preston's screams followed him, swallowed by thunder. Back at the ranch, dawn broke clean and bright. Storm King trotted to the highest ridge, his silhouette sharp against the sunrise. Silas joined him, the deed ashes in his pocket. Below, Caleb and a dozen ranchers worked the land, repairing fences, herding cattle, a community rebuilt. Preston's trucks never returned. Whispers said he'd left the state, his name a curse in every town he passed. Years later, when new buyers came to the auction hall, they'd hear the story, the old rancher and the stallion who couldn't be tamed. They'd see Storm King's descendants, their coats gleaming, their spirits wild. And if they asked about Silas Beckett, the locals would smile. Still here, they'd say. Where he's always belonged. The ranch thrived. The land remembered. And in the quiet moments, when the wind carried the scent of hay and distant rain, Silas would stand at the fence, Storm King at his side, and know some battles weren't fought with fists or guns. They were won by outlasting the storm.